Today, we will be talking about some of the symptoms of traumatic brain injury. Hello, and thank you for joining me again for another video. If you are new to the channel, my name is Lee, and approximately 12 and a half years ago, I suffered a moderate to severe traumatic brain injury. Now, here again is a list of some of the symptoms that can be associated with a traumatic brain injury. And I say some of the symptoms because myself personally, I have some symptoms that aren't on this list. I know of other people that have some symptoms that aren't on this list, but this is a good overall list of what some people experience when they have suffered a traumatic brain injury. Some of the symptoms that are listed here that I live with would be post injury amnesia, headaches, dizziness and vertigo, light sensitivity, not necessarily blurred vision, but double vision, chronic pain, diminished attention span, impaired decision making, lack of impulse control, memory lapses, anxiety, aggression, depression, and post traumatic stress. Now, when talking about these, I will say again that some people that suffer from traumatic brain injuries don't have these symptoms, or they have the same symptoms but on a varying degree, because traumatic brain injuries, just like any other injury, can affect each individual person differently. So just like when two people break their arms, they're not going to feel the same things. It might not fracture in the same way. It might not affect them equally. Two people that have a traumatic brain injury could have extremely varying degrees on how they are affected. Some of the symptoms that I would like to discuss in today's video are vision problems, memory problems, mood problems such as depression, anxiety, and one for me that I have had to deal with that seems to be unique to me, in that no one else that I have met with a traumatic brain injury has said that they go through, is loss of sense of smell. Now, let's start with the vision problems. Ever since my injury, I have suffered from double vision. And I honestly never realized how much it had affected me until I had started doing these videos. I had always thought that when I move my eyes to the right to a certain degree, that is when the vision becomes doubled. But in reality, I don't know if you had noticed, but I have noticed from looking back at my videos while I'm editing them that I talk to you with my head slanted slightly to one side. And I don't do that to try to show off the scar or to. I don't do it for any reason. And I, again, didn't know that I had ever done it. But when I straighten my head to the camera and I look straight at the camera, I now see two cameras. And again, I had always thought that previously I had to look to the right and then I would start to see double. But I guess it's just been affecting me so long that I just naturally started forcing myself to turn my head again so I could see clearly. And it's amazing to me that 12 and a half years later, even though knowing that I had double vision, I had never realized how much it had affected me in that way. Next will be memory. Now, for anyone who knows me, and if anyone remembers my first video, I talk about waking up in the hospital. And I say it with air quotes like that because I was never necessarily knocked out or unconscious. I was conscious right after the injury. You can hear me talking in the background of the 911 call, which in a later video I will play for you. I was conscious for the first 12 days that I was in the hospital, but I have absolutely no recollection of any of it, or even the 4 or 5 hours before the injury actually happened. So for me, that tends to be honestly one of the biggest things that bugs me today about the whole thing is that that day in December has changed my life forever. And more than likely, I will never know what actually happened or why it actually happened. About 8 months ago, I was in the emergency room. I had passed out and I wound up in the emergency room. And the nurse that I was talking to had told me that her husband had suffered a traumatic brain injury years ago. And I don't recall if she said that he remembered the injury or not, but she was telling me that after the injury, they had taken a family vacation to Florida to Disney World, and her husband had absolutely no recollection of that trip whatsoever. And I know what it's like to not remember some things, but how to be on the other end. Luckily, my parents both have pretty amazing memories for the things that we have done and the trips that we have taken. But I can only imagine not just the suffering that people with Alzheimer's go through with their loss of memories, but how it affects their family members. Now, the gentleman I'm referring to doesn't have Alzheimer's, but for him to have taken a family trip and him not remember any of it. Now, again, my memory problems aren't from a different source, but me not remembering the injury or the week and a half after is different than not remembering a week long event that took place months to a year after the injury had occurred. And I just can't fathom what that would be like. Mood problems, depression, anxiety, post traumatic stress. Me, a big one is irritability, just being an overall pain in the ass. Now, luckily, I kind of have mine under control. I don't let the everyday people or the drivers or the people that I meet or see on Facebook or, well, I don't use TikTok, but the people that my friends send me on TikTok, I don't necessarily let them, well, that's not true. A lot of the times they do get under my skin and they do irritate me, but I never take it out on anyone. I never get angry with just someone that I see because they're being stupid. I tend to take out all my anger and all my irritability out on my father. I'm not proud of that. I'm not necessarily happy about that. I guess I'm thankful because I don't have to worry about him ever calling the cops on me because of it. But I wish that I could get better and just not take it out on anyone. But then again, I know plenty of people that have anger issues and never suffered from a traumatic brain injury. So I guess that's just one that I'll have to work on. Now, one of the ones that has also bothered me, well, has affected me. I don't want to say it's bothered me for 12 years because I've kind of grown accustomed to it, is loss of smell. And I say that's a unique one, not necessarily that no one's ever lost their sense of smell, but again, for the probably 30 or 40 people that I've talked to in great lengths about their traumatic brain injuries and their symptoms and their stories, no one else has mentioned that they have lost their sense of smell. So I say that is unique because, well, it's, I guess I got to have something, right? Now, that one turns out to be more entertaining than not. A lot of the times, friends that have known me for years, friends that have known me since before my injury, it's fun going to their houses for cookouts and stuff. And they say, "Oh man, this smells great, doesn't it?" And then they look at me and I just look at them and laugh. And sometimes they laugh, sometimes they feel bad because they forgot. But it's not their lives. I never feel mad or anyone that, oh, how dare you forget that that's one of the trillion of other things that's bothered me since my injury. How dare you forget that? No, that's stupid. If anything, it's something to laugh at, and they never get yelled at when they fart in my car or when we're on a road trip. It's just, it's, yes, it is irritating in some sense. And years ago, while I was still in the Marine Corps, I got sent to a medical clinic that was supposed to specialize in traumatic brain injuries. And this was one of two that I've been to over the years. And at first, it was actually a clinic. I think it used to be like an old rundown, well, not rundown, but an old out of use hospital that they turned into this clinic. And they had the more severe patients and the patients that needed more constant care and constant supervision stayed up in the clinic, and all the new patients stayed up there. And then once you had been there for long enough to prove that you were capable of more independent life, they had a house in downtown Johnstown that it was a duplex, and they had one side of the house was for they're more independent, but not 100% independent. They still had a staffer that lived there or a staffer that worked there with the clients while they carried out their business. And then during the day, they would take a bus, or actually, I'm not sure how they got to and from the clinic. But at this point in time, by the time I was sent to this TBI clinic, I had been driving myself for a while. So after the first couple months of me actually being in the main clinic, when they sent me down to the house, I was on the solely independent side, I guess. Luckily, I don't smoke. It was a not a gas powered house, but I'm sure anyone who's ever lived on their own would know, or anyone that ever grew up in a house that a gas stove and everything like that. About a couple weeks or maybe a month after I was in the independent house, my parents came down from New York to visit, and they had come in the house. And luckily, my mom has always had a good sense of smell. And as soon as she walked inside, she's like, "We need to get out of here. We need to open up all the doors and all the windows, and we need to get out." At the time, I wasn't cooking very much, or if I was, it was a microwave meal, and I hardly ever used the stove. And I, at the time, was, I guess, unaware of how the pilot light system and everything worked. And there had been a gas leak, and it had filled up the house enough that my mom could smell it right when she walked inside. And I had absolutely no idea. Luckily, that my mom was there and she was able to warn me. And then after we after we vented out the house, we went inside and relit the pilot light, and then everything was good to go. And Luckily, it didn't cause too many problems. And again, luckily, I don't smoke. Years later, since I've been living where I'm at now, I was at Walmart one time, and this older lady came up to me and she asked me if I could help her with something. And I, of course, said yes. I had absolutely no problem helping her. And she was shorter, so I figured, oh, she just needs help getting something off of one of the shelves. So I follow her down the aisle or wherever we were heading, and she hands me something, and she's like, "Well, can you tell me how this smells or what this smells like?" And I just started laughing because little did she know she just literally asked me to do the one thing that I couldn't possibly help her with. And I said, "No, I'm sorry, I can't do that." And she gave me a dirty look, and I tried to explain it to her why I couldn't do that, but I think she just didn't want to hear it, and she just turned around and gave me a disgusted look and walked away. Now, in my last video, I talked about COVID and how the lockdowns affected people and how I was not necessarily as affected by them because of my previous personal lockdown in the time with my helmet. Now, when COVID first came out and they started listing the symptoms and telling the people what to look out for, I became concerned. There are a few of these symptoms that I deal with on a regular basis, and I have been dealing with them way before COVID was ever a thing. Fatigue, headaches, loss of taste or smell. Now, when the country started to open back up and doctors' offices were allowing patients to come back to the clinics and dentists and anything else, anytime that you would go and you would check in, and the secretary or the nurse at the front would always ask you a question. Oh, have in the past 24 to 48 hours or in the past week, have you suffered from any of these symptoms? Headache, loss of smell, blah, 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 these symptoms. Well, at the beginning, I was honest, and then I would say, yes, I've suffered from headaches and loss of smell and this and that. And the people would be concerned. Again, there was a pandemic going around, and I had tried my best to explain. I would show them the scar. I would explain that I've had a traumatic brain injury for about 12 and a half years. And unless COVID's been a thing a lot longer than they've been told, I've had these symptoms for from something else other than COVID. And time after time after time, I would explain myself, I would explain these things. And for whatever reason, whether it was just out of fear or out of protocol, they never really accepted what my answers were, even though I was being honest. I didn't, just off of listing those symptoms, I could never tell you if I had COVID or not because, again, my head always hurts. I haven't been able to smell anything in 12 years. So just by going off of that, I can only be honest with you in saying that. Towards the end, or a few months into when things started opening up, it got to the point where I was getting so frustrated with people either A, not believing me, or B, just being in such fear over COVID that when I was asked those questions, I would just, not that I'm proud of it, but I would just lie and be like, nope, I've never had a headache. What is a headache? Oh, I can smell perfectly fine and you don't smell very good. And it's just, again, I didn't want to lie, but when telling the truth got me questioned more, just people today, doctors today, scientists today are still learning how the brain functions, and who knows if we will ever truly know 100% of how it affects our body. So if the scientists and the doctors that are studying this all the time can't figure it out and have a hard time explaining these things to people, how am I, little old me, going to be able to convince somebody that I'm not contagious? I'm just special. How is anyone that suffers from any major injury going to be able to prove or make it well known to anyone, friends, coworkers, family, the things that they're dealing with if people just don't want to listen? I'm recording this video before the 4th of July weekend because I will be out of state for the holiday. This will probably be posted after July 4th, so I hope you all enjoyed your holiday. And I look forward to making more videos for you once I return home. Take care.